I can't believe I lived this long. I was born November 7th, 1935, in Frankfurt, Germany. It was the worst of times, especially for a Jew. The Nazis had taken over the jobs. My parents were thus unemployed. The doctor who delivered me could not work in a hospital. He had to come to the apartment. My father knew that we had to get out. My mother was fearful. My grandparents thought, hey, isn't Germany big enough? This all will pass, don't worry about it. My father tried getting into other countries. It didn't work. Finally, he went to the United States consulate. They said, look, we can give you a visitor's visa for a very short stay, but it's only for you and not for your wife and not for your son. So we were left in Germany. My father left for the United States, arrived in New York on the first day of January 1937, and he went to the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, or the Council of Jewish Women, one of those organizations that take care of refugees. We stayed in Germany, and we would not see him for a year and a half. In the meantime, what he tried to do was to get us what was called an affidavit. That is, somebody who would vouch for us when we came to the States so we wouldn't be on the dole and we wouldn't be impoverished. But as I say, he eventually got it. He forwarded the documents to my mother, and approximately a year after he had left, we boarded a ship for New York on March 23rd, 1938. I was 2.5 years old when I got to the United States. We had very little money. We had to borrow. He was happy to see us. I don't recall that, meeting him very much, but I do remember sort of him being picked up by this man that I had not seen in a long time. He hugged me, and there we were together finally after a year and a half. It was very nice. I know it was very nice for my mother, and I was happy to have my dad, although I remember very little. My father had a small apartment in Washington Heights in the northern part of Manhattan. He had work, but selling life insurance to German Jewish refugees. But he couldn't get far with that because he was too ill and he was in and out of hospitals. In September of 1939, he died. And my mother was left with very, very little money. She desperately needed a job. And she had to borrow more money because she had developed a tumor on her stomach, which thankfully proved to be benign, but it needed an operation. And every time she was in that hospital, whether it was for the stomach or later on her eye, she'd have to put me away either in a children's colony or in a children's shelter. Somebody, I think it was a family relative, or somebody like that, found my mother a job with a woman, Upper West Side of Manhattan. And the woman told her, look, you can work for me. You'll be a live-in maid, cook, you do whatever I need done, but I don't want any children in here. You need to put him somewhere. And, there's just no children here. My mother could do nothing, but at 3 years of age, I was put in an orphan asylum, which to me was a rather cold, forbidding place on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. I remembered it as long as I live. My mother said, "You're going to stay here now. You're going to stay with all these other children." I said, "Take me home. I want to go home." I started screaming. I started crying. I threw an ink bottle, I remember. My mom, aside from me getting crazy and all that, my mom was really, I would miss her very much. I went into this place anyway, and there were a lot of other kids there, children, all about my age, many refugees, kids from broken families, displaced families, people who had no one. There were some people who had no parents visiting them, nobody. And I remember there was a lot of crying. I cried all the time. In fact, I didn't know what it was like not to cry. Screaming for my mother. When my mother came, when she visited, which in winter I think was once every 2 weeks, and in summer, maybe once a week, "Please take me home. I want to go home. I want to go home." I was 7 years old when my mother took me out of the orphanage. Couldn't believe it. It was October of 1943. We were going to live together in the apartment building, in the apartment where my mother worked as a maid. The woman who my mother worked for said, "He must stay in his room or in the kitchen. He is not to be at any time anywhere else in the apartment." I know it was a pretty large apartment, and in the 6 months I was there, I only looked once into the other rooms. When I was 8 years old, my mother took me and we moved into this small house in Jamaica, Queens, with a new stepfather and a stepbrother, coming out of an orphanage, coming out of a tiny apartment. And now this place was incredible. I ran up and down stairs. I opened drawers. I ran into the basement. I looked out in the garden. It was a kid's dream. I couldn't believe it. I had a brother. I had a father. I had a mother, and we were all together in a house. This was highly unbelievable. My brother was, to me, a real treasure. He looked after me. He was 17 years older than me. It was somebody I really, literally looked up to. He gave me a harmonica. That spurred my love of music on. I had sounds coming out of it. You know, hey, I could play "O Susanna" or "Turkey in the Straw." Eventually I did "Ode to Joy," the last movement of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. I mean, I took to music. I took to my big brother. I took to that house. And I felt resurrected again. You know, it was like unbelievable. School itself was one of the most ghastly experiences of my life. I hated it. In the second grade, I had a teacher who insisted that I write with my right hand, but I'm a lefty. First of all, I was in a place that I felt it totally alienated. And my grades began to suffer. I wasn't good at arithmetic. I didn't write the way a teacher wanted. Pretty soon, I got the report card, and it was all failures. So what did I do? I tore it up. And when the teacher found out about that, she hauled me into the principal's office, and I will never forget this as long as I live. I was sitting there, the teacher was standing beside me, and the principal was behind his desk, drumming his fingers on the desk and saying, "What shall we do with him, this problem child?" I felt awful, that, totally alienated. and angry. I was really angry. And as time went on, in the third grade, I got left back again. I was about to start high school, and I thought, this is good. I think I'm going to turn over a new leaf. My mother was always concerned because she was asked to come to school to talk to the principal or talk to the teachers. I had an English teacher in the 9th grade who said to me, "Peter, you should do better. You're not a dumb person. You're smart. You read books. You're interesting," and so on. "I'm going to send you to Queens College for an evaluation and find out what's going on." They found out that, hey, he likes music. Why don't you concentrate on giving him something he likes? Okay. Sent to the music department. They asked, "Do you want to play an instrument?" I said, "Yes, I do." Well, okay. They gave me a bassoon, a woodwind, double reed. I said, "Oh, okay, let me try that." And I liked it. I enjoyed myself. I played in the band. I played in the orchestra. After a while, things began to happen which were not so good for me, and that was my rebellious nature came out with teachers that I didn't care for or I felt were not fair to me. And in my physics class, I had a teacher who was very strict. Everybody knew her. Oh, she's very strict. Okay. She had this quirky thing about you've got to write your notes on the right side of the page and do your illustrations on the left side of your notebook. And then she added, "If I see any elbows on the desk, I'm going to give you a demerit. I don't want to see any elbows on the desk." Well, I'm left-handed, okay? So I asked her if I could just please reverse it. Can I do my longhand on the left side of the page and my illustrations on the right? She said, "Nope, this is the way it's going to be and you're going to do it." So what I did it anyway. And when it came time for notebook inspection, guess what? She held the notebook up to the class. She said, "See this notebook?" And she started ripping out the pages. I said, this really sucked me. And what I did was I figured, I'm out of here. And I quit school. I quit school. Of course, I had to do two things. I had to finish up school. That is at night. And I had to work during the day. So I went to school at night, and after about close to a year, I finally got my degree. After about another 8 months or so, I got a draft notice. I knew I had to serve. It was that time, if you were fit, you'd need to go into the service. I did not want to go into the Army. I figured I'd have more chances going into the Air Force. So I went in. Lo and behold, I had to take a test. It was the Armed Forces Qualification Test. Everybody has to take it to find out what skills I have. Well, there are 4 categories. The highest is 1, and so on, 2, 3, and 4. 4 is the lowest. Guess what? I was the lowest. I didn't do well. So what happened? In fact, a sergeant in what was an education department said to me, he was actually an education specialist, he says, "Drew, there's something wrong here. You're not like that. So you can do better." They gave me what was called an oral test, and they said, "We're going to ask you a series of questions. Let's see how you do. You don't have to write anything." So they asked me about poetry, about art, about politics, about history, about government, about psychology, stuff like that. And I did very well, and they were very impressed. And they said, "Well, how did you get to be a Category 4? We don't know." I said, "Look, don't do those other things." They said, "Look, we're going to give you another test with another group of people, but let's see how you do because we want to see what kind of instructor you would make." So they gave me this test, and out of 129 people, 8 were chosen for academic instructor. That means classroom instructor, where I would teach military subjects to basic trainees, and also some civilian kind of subjects. Of the 8, I was the only one who had absolutely no college. There were people who went to Harvard and Yale and University of Pennsylvania. They were really smart, and I think they were leagues ahead of me. But I wound up teaching, and I did a very good job of it. And I said, hey, this is a piece of cake. I'm in a classroom. It's wonderful. And to boot, after a while, they made me an evaluator of teachers. So finally I felt, gee, I've arrived. This is great. In addition, I became a projectionist at a 35mm motion picture theater. And I loved that because I always loved movies. Movies were a kind of lifeblood to me. When I got out of the Air Force, I was accepted into C.W. Post College as an education major. I was about 3/4 of the way through the first semester when my father injured himself. As a butcher, he had what was called a TIA, trans-ischemic attack, which is a kind of stroke. And he got a serious injury in his arm, but one thing was sure, he couldn't work anymore. And so I became a breadwinner. Throughout my life, I did many things. I worked for Time Life. I worked as a bookkeeper and office manager for an air conditioning company. I was in film distribution. I worked as a teacher. I worked as a guide around New York City. I was a taxi driver. I was a pool inspector. I was a manager of country clubs. I was a part-time filmmaker. I did video things. I was a library lecturer, all of which I got paid for. So, it was busy all the time. I was all over the map with all different types of things. Eventually, I got hired as a regular in the New York City school system, teaching first elementary school, which I had the license for, and then secondary school that I also had the license for. And I wound up teaching, in the social studies curriculum. I wound up also teaching in college as an adjunct lecturer, all of which made me very happy. Getting into a job I really liked and was respected for how I taught and doing the things I loved, that is teaching film, teaching social studies, talking about history, talking about a lot of things. And I reached that pinnacle, that level. In my personal relationships, I'd been seeing a lot of women, going out, having affairs. The question is, was I in love? I went to a party, and there was this woman sitting by herself, and I started a conversation with her. Turned out this was the woman I was going to marry. 8 months later, I married her. And I began to have second thoughts. We had some differences, and I was not a happy person. I thought, well, if I'm looking for love, this isn't it. And there were differences that in other words, that didn't keep me in the mix, in the marriage. The one thing that did, however, because it was 14 years that I stayed, was my daughter, Jessica. I loved Jessica very much, and I did not want her to become an orphan. I didn't want to walk away and leave her. And that was one of the major reasons that I didn't leave earlier, that I didn't split. is because I wanted her to have a dad, something I didn't have. And I would, just thinking about it, made me tear up. I couldn't not ever contemplate the idea that a child that young would all of a sudden have no father. So I said, I'm staying. When she got to her freshman year in high school, I made the break. It was difficult. I cannot tell you how it broke my heart. It was something that I don't want anybody to go through, but I remember telling her, I was at the dinner table, and Muriel said outright, your father's leaving us. And Jessica ran into her room crying. I went in. It broke my heart. Absolutely broke my heart. She said, please stay. You can sleep in another room, whatever. Please stay. I couldn't do it. I could not do it. I wanted, and I was the kind of father that was a mother hen. She took one step, I took two. I was the helicopter parent, you know, and it was just the idea. I got so emotional at the thought that I would be leaving. Months later, she got used to the fact because she also had friends whose parents split. It was not unknown to her, and she was also growing up. My daughter and I are very close, very, very close. And we see each other quite often, whenever we can. But I'm very happy that those issues resolved themselves on both, on her side and on mine as well. That Jessica and I, Jessica understood what I was going through, and I understood, of course, what she was going through. She wound up, she went to college, majored in physical therapy, became a physical therapist in the Boston area, and I was very proud of her. And she met somebody she loved, Greg, and they got married. Had 2 children, so I had 2 grandchildren, Anna and Paige. Grandchildren now are grown up now. One is 22, the other is 25. One is a nurse, a registered nurse, and the other is into biomedical engineering, something she didn't get from me. After a while, the family had a major tragedy. Greg got sick. He got stage 4 cancer and passed away at the age of 51. And it was, of course, devastating for the family. And it's interesting that the youngest daughter wants in biomedical engineering, wants to be a cancer researcher so that she could figure out a cure for what happened to Greg. I remained single for about 20 years. I had been working on a cruise ship. We happened to be in the Baltic, and it was a farewell dinner, and I happened to notice somebody I knew from previously, and it was Deanna. And I thought, oh my goodness. She saw me. I rushed over, hugged her. She introduced me to her husband at the time. I didn't see her for about 2 or 3 years afterwards. And then on a Valentine's Day, I received a call. She had mentioned to me that her husband died a number of months before. She wondered how I was doing. We started dating, Seriously, I took her to a restaurant called Santorini, My Love, one of the most romantic restaurants on Long Island. And soon I moved in with her in her apartment. After about maybe a year, we moved into Manhattan together. We had been living together for some time, and I said to her at one point, I'd like to talk about marriage. And she said to me, you mean as some kind of a concept or something like that? I said, no, or the wedding, the guests and things like that, dancing, etc. I said, yeah, just like that. She said, is this a proposal? I said, in fact, it is, yes. She said, well, get down on your knees. I said, huh? I've got arthritis. I'll never get up again. Anyway, I did. We got married. I met her family. She met my family. We got very close. Did many trips. Become Manhattanites, doing the town. Many shows, many operas. We're very close. I found my love. So I'm extremely happy. I had a good chance of expanding my repertoire in the clarinet, playing more, getting involved with groups in different venues, the 92nd Street Y, the New School, even the Queensborough Symphonic Band. I was having a great time. And a fellow musician and I organized a jazz group in Queens where about 15 musicians would show up every Saturday, and we would play the repertoire of the American Songbook. And that was basically Cole Porter, Rodgers and Hart, Rodgers and Hammerstein, George Gershwin. And we had all sorts of musicians. We had amateurs, we had semi-professionals, we had professionals, and it was really good. And so I just continued. We played a lot of stuff in unison, which sounded alike. I said, how can I change that? I decided I needed to study so that I could do some really good composition. And I studied with a guy named Phil Rothman, who was head of New York City Music Services. And he taught me a lot. And I started to compose and write all kinds of music. We began to sound better. We began to sound like a big band should. I made 3 CDs, one that came out in 2012 and is kind of a favorite of mine because it had to do with an unjust execution in the South. It was called Blues for Troy.
justice for me. Georgia, Georgia, U.S.of.A. Georgia, Georgia, U.S.of.A. Georgia, Georgia, U.S.of.A. Georgia.
And that was a very deep and involved work. The second CD was pop music from the American Songbook, and as was the third one. One was called Where and When, and the second was called And What's More. Both were pretty good, and they were on the Jazz Weekly charts. So I was very happy. I had reached a kind of pinnacle. I decided to write a memoir. It's been bouncing around in my head, actually, for a number of years. Jessica had asked me, she said, you know, you've done so many things, you had so many jobs, you've been all over the place, you should write it down so that we can remember it, so I can remember it, so I can pass it on. And I started writing. At first, I thought maybe I'm going to get, writer's block, but it didn't happen that way. Quite the opposite. The words just kept tumbling out. There was just so much information, and I was able to do it. And before you know it, I was saying, all right, now I'll talk about this aspect of my life, and then that aspect, and so on. It just came out. Before you know it, I had about 200 and some odd pages typed. And I got myself a very good editor, a very good copywriter, graphic artist, and now it's a completed work. It's something else that I'm very, very proud of. But there was one thing I needed to do, and that was I decided to write a symphony in 4 movements, a classical symphony. That job is just about complete and ready for some serious recording. It's about 30 minutes long. I'm really looking forward to it. It's for a big orchestra. You know, when I play, I hear Mozart and Beethoven almost talking to me. I think that's maybe a little hubris, but it's true. I'm very much moved by it. And music is, well, as someone said once, everybody may desert you and fail you, but your art never will. And that's what I feel about it. You know, considering where I came from, and now I'm looking and I'm saying, hey, if you know me and you know my life, how many accomplishments have I had? It's been repeat, redo this, redo that, try it again, keep slogging on. I'm at a place that if this were the end of my life, I could be happy. It's up there. That's the way I feel. I came from a place where I was a failure. I was having problems. I wasn't accomplishing anything, or what I was very little. I had a lot of luggage, a lot of baggage, And look where I am now, and look what I've accomplished. Look what I was able to do. And I'm thinking, my poor mother, she'd be proud. Would be really proud. You made it.